It's day 238. It's also December 30th, 2019. And we're in Pecos, Texas. You ever wake up in the morning and ask yourself, what am I doing? And more importantly, why? Yeah, me too. Hi, my name's Craig, and this is my story. A story about life. Life out there. For visuals while listening, search Life Out There on your favorite social media platform or use the links in the podcast description. Texas. The Lone Star State. Everything's bigger in Texas, right? So let's start there. Now, I've said it before, I never could do an accent. I wish I could, 'cause I love them. Especially when it comes to how Texans tell you what's what. From howdy to y'all, or what about fixin' to? Or all hat no cattle, bigger than Dallas, come hell or high water, or even mosey. Mosey along, cowboy. And then there's one of my favorites. Ain't my first rodeo. And what about bless your heart? Texans have a way of saying things. And that's likely because Texans have a way of doing things. Seems they always have. And it's pretty tough to start learning about any particular town in Texas without running into a few notable, in fact, pretty remarkable historical facts that make Texas unique amongst its 49 counterparts. For example, when reading about another state's history, you'd likely not find yourself reading about an amusement park. An amusement park named Six Flags Over Texas. An amusement park that would open in Arlington, Texas in 1961. A company that would go on to open theme parks all across the U.S., Canada, even Mexico, and in doing so, becoming one of the largest theme park companies in the world. And while what the company has done does merit mention in the state's history, but it's not what makes it pop up during an initial search. So what does? Its name. Six Flags Over Texas was named to commemorate the fact that Texas, over the past 500 years, has been governed by and flown the flag of 6 separate nations and republics, including its own, a claim that no other state in the Union can make, an experience that is uniquely Texas. Beginning way back in the year 1519, when it would be Spanish explorers and missionaries that would lay claim to the area and maintain control until 1685. But ongoing disputes in the area would bring Spain back to the helm with governmental control over the area again in 1690. This time, Texas would call Spain home for 131 years until 1821. And it would be the French in the middle of all that would add its name in 1685, when they established a fort in the territory. But their presence was short-lived. Once Spain learned of their presence in the area, they'd reassert their control over the region, politely asking the French to leave, which they did in 1690. In 1821, Texas would fall under the control of Mexico. Having just gained independence from Spain, Mexico would claim Texas until 1836. And during this period, the region would see an influx of both Mexican and American settlers. But within Mexico, the government was in upheaval. Multiple revolutionary groups were also fighting to gain control of the country, which at the time was one of the largest countries on the North American continent. And all this chaos would eventually lead to Texas declaring its independence from Mexico, and they would begin their own Texas Revolution. And after winning decisive victories and a few losses, remember the Alamo? Texas would fly its own flag and take governmental control for itself in 1836. And this is also around when Texas would begin referring to itself as the Lone Star State. The term was in reference to the single star on the flag that Texas would fly over its territory during its struggle to gain independence from Mexico. The United States, well, they'd come along and add its flag to the territory after annexing Texas and making it the 28th state in the Union in 1845. But during the American Civil War, Texas would secede from the Union and fly the Confederate flag in response to its position on slavery. But after the Confederacy's defeat in 1865, Texas would rejoin the Union. And within all that history, Texas can make a couple more notable claims that few other, if any, states in the Union can make. Asserting its independence, for example. Now, while places like California and Vermont can make similar claims, unlike Texas, there were no actual battles or a revolution involved. And in addition, during this period, Texas would be recognized globally by countries all over the world as an independent and sovereign nation. Now, technically, I guess Hawaii can be added to this list. The islands would operate as an independent monarchy for over 100 years before it joined us colonials in 1959 as the 50th state. But Mexico, however, would not recognize Texas as an independent nation, but rather a rebellious and troublesome region of the territory they still considered theirs, which is exactly why Texas declaring its independence from Mexico would in very short order lead to the start of the Mexican-American War. Now, Tejas, as it would be known for a good deal of this period of time, the name given to the region by Native Americans. The word Tejas means friend or allies, and was bestowed upon the region in recognition of the friendly existence of Native American tribes throughout the eastern side of the area. And upon Spain's arrival in Tejas, the name would be adopted and used all across the region. It wasn't until Tejas declared its independence from Mexico that the J would be replaced with the X in the name as we know it today, and the newly formed nation would begin referring to itself as Texas. And the list of uniquely Texas claims keeps going. And seriously, is everything really bigger in Texas? Well, it seems that a lot of things are. Texas is home to the largest state capitol building in the nation. The Texas Capitol Building in Austin is even taller than the U.S. Capitol Building in Washington, D.C. And the King Ranch? Now for me, until reading this, King Ranch meant a really expensive Ford pickup. Shell out some $60,000 or more and you can drive around in a super fancy pickup with King Ranch stamped on it. The name's even stitched into those fancy leather seats. But it turns out Ford borrowed that name from one of the largest ranches in the world, the King Ranch in South Texas, a working ranch that is larger than the state of Rhode Island. And you've met me, right? I just learned that the King Ranch in Texas is one of the largest ranches in the world. So I had to know where the largest is. So I asked the internet for the 10 largest working cattle ranches on the planet. And the first 7? Well, they're all in Australia. Who knew? And the other 3 that are in the top 10? Well, they're here in the U.S., and 2 of them right here in Texas. The King Ranch is the biggest. And that 3rd in the U.S.? Well, that actually spans a region of both New Mexico and Colorado. And then there's the Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, home to the largest urban bat colony in the world. Yep, bat colony. Over 1.5 million Mexican free-tailed bats call that bridge home. Now, I'm not super sure that this is a world's largest that I'd want to spend much time around. And then there's the Texas Medical Center, the largest medical complex in the world, and it calls Houston home. And there's other stuff, like the Texas Pledge of Allegiance. Texas is the only state with its own Pledge of Allegiance. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee. Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. The pledge is still practiced today in Texas schools and public events. Oh, and at a corner drugstore in Waco, Texas, you'll find the spot where a pharmacist, messing about in the lab, would haul off and create the oldest major soft drink brand in the U.S., Dr. Pepper. This discovery and branding even predates Coca-Cola by a year. And so much more. A few of the country's largest observatories and even space stations call Texas home, a claim that only a handful of states can make. It seems that we had wandered aimlessly into a land with a past so storied, so deep. In the vast expanse of West Texas, where the horizon stretches endlessly and the sky is an ever-changing canvas of blues and fiery sunsets, lies a land steeped in history and rugged beauty. This is a place where the echoes of the past whisper through the arid winds, and the spirit of the frontier lives on in every dusty trail and weathered rock. West Texas begins where the Pecos River carves its way through the landscape, marking the boundary between the familiar and the wild unknown. Here, the land transforms into a tapestry of contrasts. The towering peaks of the Guadalupe Mountains rise majestically, their ancient rocks telling the tales of geological upheaval and time's relentless march. The Chihuahuan Desert sprawls beneath, a harsh yet captivating realm where life persists against all odds. This region, also referred to as the Trans-Pecos, is a mosaic of culture and history. Indigenous people such as the Apache and the Comanche once roamed these lands, their presence etched into the very fabric of the earth. Spanish explorers and missionaries followed, leaving behind missions and settlements that still stand as silent witnesses to their endeavors. And the cowboy culture, synonymous with Texas, finds its heart in these rugged terrains. Ranches stretch across the plains, where cattle gaze under the watchful eyes of modern-day cowboys, the heirs to a legacy that began with the Spanish vaqueros. The lore of the cowboy, with its tales of cattle drives and frontier justice, is woven into the identity of West Texas, celebrated in rodeos and preserved in the stories passed down through generations. And, as we had just learned a couple nights ago, El Paso, the largest city in this vast region, stands as a testament to the blend of cultures that define West Texas. Nestled along the Rio Grande, it's a city where the American Southwest meets Mexican heritage, creating a vibrant tapestry of traditions, cuisine, and art. The Chamizal National Memorial commemorating the resolution of the Chamizal dispute, a testament to the enduring spirit of diplomacy and cooperation. In the remote corners of West Texas, the night sky reveals its true splendor, far from city lights. The stars shine with a brilliance that has inspired countless stargazers and astronomers. The McDonald Observatory, perched high in the Davis Mountains, invites visitors to explore the cosmos, reminding us of our place in the universe. West Texas is a land of resilience and beauty, where the past and the present coexist in a delicate balance. It's a place where the rugged landscape shapes the people, and the people, in turn, leave their mark on the land. Here, in the heart of the American West, the spirit of adventure and the quest for freedom continue to thrive, painting a portrait of a region that is as timeless as it is unforgettable. And at the heart of this legacy, we found a place called Pecos. The name Pecos is derived from a Native American term. Loosely translated, means place where there is water. Native Americans had called Pecos home for centuries, and in time settlers would join them with small ranching operations, but for the most part, Pecos would remain a quiet place, and unaffected by the back and forth between Spain, Mexico, and France. But things would pick up in the area once Texas had declared its independence from Mexico, and it would be the American settlement in 1881 that would turn the tides and mark the beginning of a growth era for Pecos. Originally established as a camp along the Pecos River, it would quickly become a railway station with the introduction of the Texas and Pacific Railways. It would also remain a cow town due to its location at the intersection of old cattle and wagon trails. Once the town was officially platted on the west side of the Pecos River, it would also become a center for ranching and agriculture throughout the region. And it would be the community's strong ties to its cowboy history and ranching heritage that would lead to the world's first organized rodeo held right here in the streets of Pecos in 1883. Now, initially, I was a little confused, having recently visited the Prescott, Arizona area, in which they claim ownership of the world's oldest rodeo, with their first rodeo being held in 1888, some 5 years after the rodeo here in Pecos. Both events still take place annually and have since their inception. So how could Pecos claim the first and not be the oldest? Well, it seems that to a certain extent, there may be a few technicalities at play here. For example, the Pecos event is considered the first organized rodeo, in which competitions were held and prizes were awarded for performance. The tradition of rodeo itself in the U.S., and the world for that matter, go far deeper into history. However, until this point, each celebration was more a matter of community, gathering for fun competitions between local ranchers for nothing more than bragging rights and a sense of that community. But nonetheless, and technicalities aside, what is clear is that each community, Pecos and Prescott, hold a valid claim to a piece of the American Southwest story, celebrations of a lifestyle, and a place about as unique as they come. And the next big boom for Pecos would be oil. The Yates oil field was discovered on October 28, 1926, and began producing 450 barrels of oil every single day. This discovery marked the beginning of a major oil boom in Pecos County. Production would quickly peak at millions of barrels annually by 1930, and oil continues to be a critical factor in the town's economic development to this day. 1942? Well, that would bring World War II to Pecos, like it did most places we've visited to date. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the Pecos Army Field would be rapidly built and quickly grow to over 4,500 personnel that would use this piece of the American Southwest to train for combat. The facility was placed in standby mode by the military in 1945 and was never reactivated. But today, the facility functions as a municipal airport meeting the general aviation needs of the Pecos of today and its nearly 13,000 residents. And then there was that one more click on the internet. Read a little more. And if I were looking for one of the most notorious fraud cases in American history, I doubt that I would have spent much time looking for it in the West Texas town of Pecos. But right here indeed is where I found one. The Billie Celestes scandal of 1962. A complex web of deceit and corruption that touched the highest levels of the U.S. government. This Billie Celestes guy was a prominent businessman in Pecos, and at the time he was known for his ventures in cotton, grain, real estate, and fertilizers. By the early 1960s, he had amassed a fortune estimated at some $40 million. Some say even more. Now, I didn't dig too deep into understanding all the detail, but what seemed clear is that making his fortune the legal way, well, maybe that wasn't enough for Billie Celestes. He'd go on to become the mastermind of several fraudulent schemes, the most notable of these being the creation of mortgages on non-existent anhydrous ammonia tanks. He convinced farmers to purchase these tanks on credit and then lease them back using the fraudulent mortgages to secure loans from banks on tanks that didn't exist. The scheme would come to light in 1962 when a journalist would publish an article in the local newspaper revealing the fraudulent mortgages, which drew national attention and an FBI investigation that ultimately would land Billie Celestes in jail. The case gained national attention due to Estes' connections with high-profile politicians, including the then Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson. The scandal was further sensationalized by the mysterious death of Henry Marshall, a federal agriculture agent, which was initially ruled suicide, but later suspected to be linked to the Estes activities. So was this Billie Celestes character even capable of murder? But let's just stop right there for a second. Everything I just learned was from a top-line internet search. I simply asked the internet to tell me some notable facts around Pecos, Texas, and it spewed out what I just read. But then, one more click, and I'd hear a very different story. The story of a West Texas kid that grew up during the Great Depression, determined to make his way in this world. A kid that by age 13, well, he'd figured out a way to turn a couple of sheep into one of the largest sheep operations in the region, and he was making more money than his dad. By age 15, he'd written a letter to the President of the United States inquiring about government programs that might be able to help his community struggle through the nation's crippling depression. And by 18, he was brokering tons of government shipments of grain into the area and funneling it to the local farmers at immense rates of profit, but at the same time giving money away by the fistful to the hard-working minorities that had been overlooked by mainstream society. He had also become known as the Fertilizer King, not only in this region of Texas, but across the entire southwest of the United States. At this point in his life, estimates have this young, free-thinking go-getter worth millions before his 25th birthday. Now, we all know that there's two sides to every story, and the truth, well, that's always somewhere in the middle. And this is where things get murky, cloudy, distorted, maybe even perhaps lost in the story of Billie Celestes in 1960s America. That one version that would have me believe that this guy, he was a guy that simply went a bridge too far in the name of greed, took advantage of hardworking farmers in a small West Texas farming community, got caught, and went to jail. And the other version? Well, that tells me of a young and aspiring go-getter that simply got in over his head, never broke a single law in place at the time, and in his aspirations of chasing the good life, he'd find himself in the middle of American politics, but was just one rung on the ladder below where he needed to be to save himself and his legacy. In this version, high-profile politicians of the time would stop at nothing, including murder, to silence anyone or anything that could get in the way of their aspiration and self-interest, money and power. And Billie Celestes? He'd be just one more fatality, thrown under the bus by those in control. Simply put, the guy that would take the rap and go down, while the Vice President of the United States simply shrugged his shoulders and claimed to know nothing of this Billie Celestes guy and his activities. The guy that photos clearly document he did know of. Or were these just chance photos, taken with the appropriate spin applied? And the versions, or stories, well, they go on. They go on to tell of a vice president, senators, and multiple department heads within the U.S. government that would go on to, without obstruction, participate in, and perhaps even facilitate the assassination of an American president. So where's the truth? If you weren't there, how do you know? How do you form an opinion? And just as importantly, what do you do with it? The events I just learned here happened over 60 years ago. So what does knowing the truth even matter? I for sure don't know. I wasn't there either. Can't tell you. But what I can tell you, for sure, is that it most definitely shapes how I look at, believe, and question, in my own head anyway, the goings-on in the country today. I've rambled on about it before, and it remains true. One side tells us one thing, the other spouts another. How will I form my own opinion? And then what'll I do with that opinion? And it makes me sad. Many of my own very best friends and family tell me all the time, what I think doesn't matter. The government, the machine, well, it's going to do what it does. And some of those folks, they don't even vote. I feel like if I've been blessed with the opportunity to be alive and to experience this America, that I owe it to myself and this America to do my very best to be educated and to do my very best when it matters most. And vote. Vote accordingly. Vote from a place of knowing the facts. And not believe something just because somebody else told me. Voting matters. I feel like if I don't vote, then I don't care. And I do care. And so it appears that Pecos and West Texas, well, they'd found yet another way to leave their mark on American history. This particular high-profile case would highlight the potential for abuse within government programs and the importance of investigative journalism in uncovering wrongdoing. And to think, we had no idea when making that random turn north in a place called Saragossa on Texas Highway 70. We'd leave the mountain ranges that border Mexico behind and head into the wide open, arid Texan desert to find all this American history in a place called Pecos, the epitome, I think, of a West Texas town. And I did explore the town a bit, and I found it interesting that while some areas of the town feel dirty, abandoned, desolate even, but then a mile or so across town, brand new housing, right along with new motels are going in. And all this new construction was odd to look at, given that in some cases, just across the highway, once flourishing motels built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, well, they're all boarded up with for sale signs spray painted on them. And it was weird to me. I wondered, why not fix all this stuff up over here? Fix up and inject life into resources that have already been used. But instead, those buildings sit rotting away, unused. And just across the street, brand new hotels built from scratch. Maybe Pecos has a plan, and we're just seeing step one. Perhaps we'll drive through here another time and see the rest of the plan. But more memorable for me, It was more about the best carne asada taco I've ever eaten at a small roadside taco stand just outside town. These things were literally heaped with cube steak and dripping with a sauce like I've never tasted. Now, you'll have to forgive me. I guess if I were a true foodie or a blogger, there'd be pictures, but I was just too busy eating. And then, when I asked where I might find a decent spot to park for the night, I was directed to a 110 outlet on the back side of the building. "Plug in and sleep right here, my friend," Valerie exclaimed. And when I asked if I could pay her for the night, she waved me away, proclaiming in a charming Mexican accent, "It's no problem. You'll come for breakfast, yes?" And indeed I did. And don't get me started on that breakfast burrito. And I think this is how I'll remember Pecos. And topping off those amazing tacos with an evening of reading, writing, and a little binge watching, Sneaky Pete, that's my favorite right now, was a pretty awesome way to round out another night in West Texas. And during walks with Dougie, I'd study that endless Texas horizon. For some reason, I kept hearing a Roy Orbison quote I once read. Orbison, famously a son of West Texas, when he said, "This place is in the middle of nowhere and 500 miles from anywhere." And I feel like I can say now, from personal experience, that I feel exactly what he meant, and that sometimes being in the middle of nowhere is the exact, perfect place to be. We'll head out tomorrow, after that breakfast burrito, of course, and go, I don't know, out there somewhere? And I wonder what we'll learn there.
Turns out, this thing called life comes with a lot of rules. Maybe it's time to break a few. Because you can. No, seriously, you can.